Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. The Lakers are through the Thanksgiving holiday. They are back at home and ready to start a stretch of the season with the big three all playing together. Maybe, Andy, are we finally going to see it? We'll talk about that. Plus, Dwight Howard giving interesting interviews. All that coming up on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to thank everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day. Andy, Thanksgiving's over, but we are thankful for people making us their first listen. Make another Locked On show your second listen. Locked On Bets, Locked On Fantasy, preview upcoming opponents for the Lakers with a Locked On podcast. It's a great way to catch up on what's going around in the league and with scout who the Lakers are going to be playing. So
I'm an Arizona Cardinals fan. I listen to Locked On Cardinals.
For example, that's
those dudes
your
are informative.
Second listen.
Yeah.
After listening to us.
Yeah, obviously.
And so, all right. So Dwight Howard's given some interesting interviews. The Lakers come back to LA, perhaps finding different aspects of what could be an identity moving forward. It's an interesting thing. I think both of us believe, Andy, that they've been kind of missing over the course of the first 20 or so games, is figuring out just exactly what kind of team they are and what they can rely on. But let's start with what we saw in Indiana. We're actually recording this on Wednesday ahead of the holiday for a Friday show. But, so LeBron comes back and dominates overtime. Wasn't a perfectly clean game up until that point. It wasn't the best game that he's ever had, but certainly in the OT, Andy, as the Lakers beat Indiana 124-116, LeBron absolutely reminded everybody what it can look like when he gets going down the stretch in the fourth quarter too. Hit some big shots there.
I was going to say it's really important to note that he had 7 points in the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter, in addition to the 8 to go along with overtime. He was hitting threes, hitting step backs, doing a dance that we will know by Friday whether or not it got him fined. It was a kind of a hybrid of the Sam Cassell big ball / impromptu pretending to grab your junk, or sort of alluding to that. We shall see. But either way, it was really interesting, Brian, because like the early part of that game, LeBron had some drives to the rim that ended up not going in. He got blocked, I believe, on his first shot of the game by Miles Turner.
I think it was Miles Turner.
Yeah, pretty emphatically. And I had in my notes that I take, during every game, that the inability to finish so far this season, even acknowledging that last season LeBron struggled to finish at the rim to begin the season, got better as it went along. It's starting to feel like reminders that LeBron is in, by LeBron standards, decline. And he is still a great player. This is not #Wash King nonsense. But everybody goes through this. And like the idea of what does it mean if LeBron goes from, say, the third or fourth best player in the league to like the 12th best player, the 14th best player over the course of, if this season or the rest of his time with the Lakers, what does that gap mean in terms of how the Lakers are built around him?
It's like almost like the difference between like Giannis and Dame.
Sure.
Dame is probably, somewhere around the 10th best player in the league, something like that.
But
Giannis is better.
Well, it reminded me just because something you've talked about a lot with the idea of, LeBron's entirety or LeBron's tenure with the Lakers, however long that lasts. But there's this talk about, could he play at 40 and beyond, teammates with Bronny, that sort of thing. And you've always said, like, the idea of 4th versus 12th, how big a deal is it? Because you're still talking about a really good player. I'm starting to think, actually, the answer is it's a pretty big deal. Like, it doesn't mean that the other version of LeBron isn't really good. It just means what you need from that number one guy becomes magnified that much more.
Right.
But down the stretch of this game, holy crap, were we reminded of what LeBron is still capable of doing when it comes to taking over games, when it comes to putting his stamp on things, big, important shots, but also, too, versatility. Because in this game, and I know it's something we're going to talk about a lot over the course of this show, he spent a lot of time as the Lakers' 5 and it unlocked a lot of good stuff with this team.
Yeah, and the Lakers playing without Anthony Davis with the flu on Wednesday, and playing in part without Dwight Howard and DeAndre Jordan by choice as the game went along. We'll come back to the LeBron thing in a second, but just to talk about in terms of the big picture stuff. But it's interesting to watch. I guess these things are related because for me, I will say this: there's a huge difference between LeBron being the second, third, fourth, fifth best player in the NBA, and the 12th, 13th, and 14th or whatever this year. Like if it happens this year, yeah, I agree with you 100%. That is monumentally impactful. If it happens in 2 or 3 or 4 seasons, that's a different deal because Anthony Davis, because you have another star, whatever it might be. The relative decline this year is important, but either way, I mean, I think one thing that is abundantly clear, in terms of any type of discussion about decline, is the idea that LeBron has to measure himself through a season and through a game in ways that he didn't have to do 10 years ago, which is understandable. He is superhuman in most ways, but he is still a person. And it is very reminiscent of the ways that Kobe, even while he was still dominant, had to pick and choose. And you didn't want him going kind of balls out for 48 minutes, 82 games a season, as much as he would want to do it. You see a lot on Twitter, like, oh, LeBron's checked out early in this game. LeBron's not engaged. I think he is ultimately, that's a lot of what that is. It's like the more I can get other guys going early, it might buy me a game where I can put up, 13 shots, 14 shots, and the team thrives. And if I can do that, he measures that he buys himself more energy and more time for other games where he has to really do what he did on Wednesday in terms of the late game and the overtime. He absolutely has to do that stuff. It is totally obvious, and it's completely okay.
Yeah, and as always, even with great superstars in your prime, man, it helps a lot when you get that help. And LeBron got some of that against the Pacers. Malik Monk had a huge game coming off the bench, 17 points, 8 rebounds in a game, by the way, that the Lakers tied the Pacers 52 apiece for rebounds. They're a team that typically gets crushed on the boards collectively. He got help in the sense that they only had 11 turnovers with an overtime, which for the Lakers is the equivalent of negative turnovers over the course of a game. Like the idea that they managed to play 5 extra minutes with only 11 turnovers is damn short of a miracle.
Oh, by the way, they got to the line 29 times. They hit 25 of them.
Yeah. Ross got to the line 11 times himself, made 9 of them. Wayne Ellington hit some outside shots. And just, again, the stuff that we saw, we definitely want to get into this, with LeBron at the 5, in part out of necessity with AD not there, in part because I think Frank Vogel is searching for things that may work. And I would like him to consider this, at least in the bucket of things that might lead somewhere. They looked really good down the stretch of this game with LeBron at the 5.
Well, look, I mean, it's particularly with who they had available. This is my biggest reason that I don't like seeing DeAndre and increasingly, quite frankly, Dwight on the floor, is because they're not that good anymore. They are not the best players the team has. And ultimately the Lakers need to be playing the best players that they have. And I as we've talked a lot about Frank Vogel's job security, and we've been critical. I think I am probably more sympathetic than the average Lakers fan to the situation that he's in. You have to at least give him credit. He is trying all kinds of stuff. Sometimes I think fans think he's trying too much. I think sometimes fans think he is, trying too many things that probably you would know, like Avery Bradley and Dwight together on the floor, whatever it might be. Question of identity to me is one that, when you look forward to where the Lakers can go, is something that is sorely missing from this team. So we'll talk about it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline, back better than ever with a new web interface for the basketball season, more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, your number one spot for all basketball, football action this season. Head to the new updated desktop or mobile website. Sign up today. Receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive said bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers for the 2021 season. Bet online, the fastest, easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the games start.
So, whether you're there are 1,000 reasons, Andy, that we could all name, and we know them all with the injuries and the roster turnover and all that, where identity becomes a challenge. But the one it's really clear when you see them in a game like they were in on Wednesday, when you see them fighting to try to come back against the Knicks, when you see them lose their integrity in places which causes them to fall into these gigantic holes and all this other stuff that they keep doing. One of the things that struck me on Wednesday was just when it's time to come back, when it's time to lean on something or the thing that teams can do to be like, you know what, this is what we're going to be. Nothing's going right, but we know we are this team.
This is the ace in the hole.
Right. 2010, the title year. We know, God damn, we can't score to save our bleeping lives, but we can lock you down for a quarter and a half and claw our way back into a game or push ahead or do something. Last year, I think, defense was still probably in the end the thing when things were going well.
You meant 2020, correct? Not 2010.
Yes, thank you. The title year. Oh, well,
okay,
that was like also a title year.
No, but I was going to say 2010. I think the thing they leaned back on was Kobe.
Kobe and Powell.
But I don't remember everything from that season.
No, it's a blur.
I should probably Google it.
Yeah, 2020.
Yeah.
When they won the title year.
Yes.
But anyway, last year, I think ultimately they could still lean on defense. It's like that's the thing that makes us, what we are, whatever it might. They don't know what they are, because it's hard because they're bad at virtually everything right now, offensively and defensively in the aggregate. And that's a hard thing, 20, as you're starting to get to 25, as you get towards halfway through the season, to not know what it is that you are. So sometimes, like you say, the small lineup works. LeBron at center, running, they have certain things that they do well, but I have no sense that they understand what their fundamental identity is as a group.
Well, to be fair to everybody involved, it's extremely difficult to build an identity, regardless of whether or not you think the pieces that they have work to build whatever they want, when you haven't been able to play everybody on a regular basis.
I completely acknowledge the circumstances.
No, but I'm saying it is understandable, and I would say even predictable, that they don't know what that identity is, because going back to the preseason, they haven't been able to just lay a foundation, even a foundation that they get wrong. Even the ability to misidentify yourself hasn't been there for this team, because they've had supporting guys in and out of the lineup. They've had the big three in and out of the lineup. We mentioned the last podcast, they've played 140 minutes together this season, LeBron, AD, and Russ, over now 20 games.
Right. That number did not go up on Wednesday because AD wasn't there.
And there is no feasible way that a brand new group with no template to fall back on is going to have any idea what their identity is. They can have some ideas in theory. Like you said before, they definitely want to be a team that gets up and down in transition, and they certainly have been looking to do that.
They try,
They try to make that happen. They're not as able as they want to, because that relies in part on the defense that they haven't built up yet. But I think in some ways this is going to come down to Frank Vogel having to decide really, okay, what is the thing that they can do the most? And then whatever I decide that is, I have to try to build around that. And even if it isn't necessarily the thing that I personally want the most, which, in Vogel's case is always going to be defense, you have to decide what you are. I also think another way that Vogel, in order to discover this, is going to have to be more flexible in terms of his typical wants or approach. I think it would help to discover that identity if they shorten the rotation. I think it is difficult at times to land on exactly what you want and the rhythms for that goal playing 10 guys. I think
they played 9 on Wednesday.
Right, but that's only because AD wasn't there.
AD
would have played 10.
Probably.
I think it would help to get to like 8.5. I think that might actually give them a bit more of a rhythm
Well,
to try to discover this.
I think that's true. I mean, if you can play the same, the same nine, eight,
Yeah,
I think nine is probably a more realistic number where like the ninth guy isn't playing, 23 minutes, but he's,
yeah.
in there. Nine is a
The
pretty
caveat being
normal
guys
number.
actually stay healthy enough to do this, but yes.
That's part of it. And there's that. And then at some point, we go back to the conversations that we had in training camp where it becomes like, geez, I wonder, as effective as a guy like Malik Monk can be, or we saw on Wednesday, Wayne Ellington hit 4 of his 6 3-pointers. And, these are huge, impactful things for the Lakers offense, 31 points between two of those guys. We've also seen nights where, I think it was in New York, those guys, I believe, were 2 of 10 from 3-point range and were incredibly inefficient. And since neither one of them is exactly, Gary Payton in the backcourt, when they're not hitting shots, it becomes very difficult to play them. I think the other part that is difficult for the identity aspect of it, I agree with you. I think they would love to play the same 9 guys in 80% of the games, mixing dudes in and out based on foul trouble, injuries, or whatever. That was Vogel's stated preference in training camp, is to have a consistent lineup with
Sure.
consistent starter. Some of this gets back to the roster shortcomings that they have, where it's hard to settle on the 9 guys that you want when 5 of them, even by role player standards, are both inconsistent and one-dimensional. And so I think that becomes difficult. This is where, to our conversation earlier in the week, THT being a consistent two-way player. I'm not talking about an all-star or 6 man of the year, but just something where you know what you're going to get most nights becomes really important. Austin Reeves, who's probably the most predictable player they have on the bench, becomes really important in a scenario like that, in terms, if you want to think about it as an identity question,
Well,
because then you can be the same thing night after night after night.
Well, once you start getting more guys available permanently, and Reeves is somebody, we were talking about LeBron playing more at the 5, and maybe looking to unlock something with that, where I think you could. This is, again, obviously AD is going to be back, but you're talking about the minutes where Anthony Davis is not playing center for you. Are there alternatives to either Dwight or DeAndre as much as possible? Having somebody like Austin Reeves out there, who is, by Laker standards, a very big guard, makes it that much easier to do that. That's why Trevor Ariza, God willing, he ever plays on this team, even if he only plays 15 minutes a night, that gives you more of the ability to do something like that. But I also think it can give them defensively. If you go with LeBron at the 5, and LeBron actually, I thought, made a really interesting point with Mike Trudell, who's the sideline reporter for the Lakers station, about how when he plays at center, he's able to call out coverages, not just accurately, but really, really quickly. Like, he's able to anticipate a lot of looks from your opponents because he's got such a high basketball IQ. He recognizes everything. He's able to tell other guys where to go. And if you're going with that type of a small lineup, there's obviously going to be some issues in terms of rebounding or in terms of size that you may give up. But at least you can lean into the idea of, we are quick defensively. We can rotate, assuming
We're mobile, we're
yeah,
switchy, we're
assuming we're on our proverbial bleep. We can actually get to places quickly, as opposed to sort of this mishmash they have of a big guy in the middle, but that isn't particularly mobile, and 4 other guys who aren't necessarily capable of funneling towards that big guy. I think this is all part of the identity thing you're talking about. Like,
right.
LeBron more at the 5, or I think even in a pinch, Melo at the 5. It's not going to fix everything,
Well,
but in
no, but what
certain
it
ways,
is,
it makes more sense. It just
right.
gives you
It
something.
becomes an extension of the
Yes.
idea that the Lakers play small with AD at the 5. Because ultimately, like, LeBron at center is not a lineup that you're going to use as much as they did on Wednesday
No,
when
AD will
AD's
be that
back,
guy.
because AD is, going to be playing 35 minutes a night. What it is, though, is a way to kind of lean further into what you're really doing by playing Davis at the 5, which is we're a team that's playing without a traditional center.
Right.
If you want to stretch the definition, I mean, Anthony Davis seems in many ways like a traditional center to me, but like you can be, but like you understand my point.
Doesn't seem like
in
one
terms
to
of
him.
size. And, skill set, no, he is not a traditional back to the basket ever, but size wise. So yeah, let's finish. I got couple more things about this I want to talk about before we get to Dwight. But we'll do it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar. I love Thanksgiving, all the food that comes with it, all the encouragement with that food, but you got to offset that decadence with something that's not pure calorie sugar, and that's where Built Bar enters the equation. The new holiday dessert. You feast on something that tastes great, but you don't have to feel guilty about it. You can replace the coconut cream pie, from Thanksgiving, the upcoming holidays. You got your Christmas, you got your Hanukkah, you got everything coming up. And you go with a coconut Built Bar instead. Go with a raspberry Built Bar instead of the traditional.
The traditional Hanukkah pie?
Yes,
what the hell's the matter with you?
The traditional raspberry pie of Hanukkah.
You are flailing about.
No,
with your Hanukkah pies.
Go read it, man. It's the sixth night. Every sixth night of Hanukkah, you celebrate with a raspberry pie.
The miracle of pie. Yes,
that was in my Haftorah. I remember that. Low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein, covered in 100% chocolate, and nothing like a Built Bar Black Friday. Be listening for it's just a huge event, all sorts of surprises. Go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, you get 15% off your first order. Again, promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Sixth night of Hanukkah raspberry pie.
Okay, Rabbi. So
man,
I'm
in touch with my roots.
I think your roots want to have a conversation with you. The other part of this that makes it really hard, in terms of like finishing up this identity conversation, defensively. Like at least it feels like, at least in theory, like if they leaned into what they were defensively, playing without the center, like it's not going to function the way I think they would always like. We saw even in Indiana where they worked hard. There were a couple possessions where Indiana got 2, 3, 4, 5 bites at the proverbial apple. On different possessions. A couple moments where they gave up just some really terrible offensive rebounds, and like that's going to happen. But at least in theory, the other thing that you get out of they sort of leaning into this concept of small, and just rolling with it, is that it would push you more towards those things where you ought to be able to thrive offensively. And as much as time as we spend on the defense with the Lakers, they've had far more moments over the course of the season where I think they look like they've either locked in or made improvement, or at least show some capability defensively than I think offense. I think offense has been far uglier on a more regular basis this year than the defense has been. It's just people focus on defense because it's been the identity of this team for a couple years, and defense wins championships and all these other things. Frank Vogel's a defensive coach and so on. It gets a little bit more attention. The offense has been really bad. And so smaller lineups, quicker lineups, more offensive, like ought to help them with the running and the pace and the type of play that they want to do on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, I think people have focused more on the defense with this team because the offense, the issues that they've had, has felt more justifiable or understandable just because you've had LeBron in and out of the lineup so often. You've had AD in and out of the lineup. You've been missing Talen Horton-Tucker. You've been missing a guy like Kendrick Nunn who's supposed to juice things. Russ is a guy whose inefficiencies are always most stark at the beginning of the season, or I guess, according to some skeptics, during the playoffs. But the offense has felt, I think, to a lot of people like something that could eventually get smoothed out with the gift of continuity.
Well, at the very least, there's the expectation that the offense is supposed to be good, where people thought the defense could suck anyway.
Right. That's my point. I believe it was George W. Bush who said the soft bigotry of low expectations. That's what you're dealing with the defense. I don't think there's a lot of people who have faith that they can get past a certain threshold anyway, and it's ultimately the offense that's going to end up having to carry it. You know what I mean? Like the offense is actually what's going to I think in the eyes of a lot of people, make or break this team because that's what it's built to do in theory.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an interesting way of putting it. Like, the when the defense plays well, it's almost found money.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so but anyway, we'll see what it looks like going forward because the Lakers have you get Sacramento. Again, some games, especially back at home, where that are winnable, mixed in with some really significant challenges. But at the very least, it's set up for the big three to have time to play together. Assuming Anthony Davis is over his flu by Friday, LeBron is healthy again, Westbrook is healthy. Knock on wood, AD is there, and that's the part that needs to come together as much as anything. They'll fill in the supporting cast. Dwight Howard was a GQ, gave
Yeah.
a really interesting interview. Had
Yeah,
some
with
interesting.
Tyler Tynes, who's been killing it with GQ in general and the
Mhm.
NBA interviews that he does. He's just good writer, good interviewer. But Dwight opened up on a lot of different stuff in terms of his personal life, his love of animals and roses, his thoughts on the lack of, I guess, ESPN and media shine that he's getting with the team this year. And I thought there were a lot of interesting aspects to it. He clarified he's now down to about 13 snakes, Brian. At one point he had about 50, but he's down to 13. He considers if you're looking for
By the
a
way, he just let
connection.
the rest of them go.
Well, if you're looking for a
I'm just kidding.
connection
He didn't
point,
do that.
this is in Ireland. If you're looking for like a
Be
connection
free, my friends.
between Dwight and snakes, he considers snakes to have, quote, a bad rap. They're very docile creatures, very silent, and don't do a lot of moving unless they're outside their cages. I think they're amazing. Reptiles can teach you how to be still. And at the risk of reading too much into Dwight, I think Dwight is somebody who has a
Let's
very
say, do you
difficult
think there
time.
maybe could be a little projection there?
Yes. Although he did say that his snake Minnie, which is short for Minnie Mouse, that's her government name, bit him one time, and
Christian name.
she knew eventually that immediately that she did wrong. She balled up like, "Man, I shouldn't have done this. I wasn't mad or anything." Dwight said, "I was hurt. It just felt bad that she was afraid like that." Like Dwight really feels like he's got this kinship with these snakes. Like he talked about how he got the idea for starting up what is apparently a huge rose garden. He was visiting a friend of Oprah Winfrey's, and this guy had like a massive rose garden. And he said he thought maybe they had like 100 different types of roses, and he thought that he wanted to add this to, as he said, his repertoire. We've talked actually with Dwight before about farming.
He's a farmer.
Yeah,
Big
he's
farm in Georgia, like a
yeah,
real working farm.
very serious about that. But he said that like as a kid, quote, I would hear people say, stop and smell the roses. Now I try to do that a lot, basically say, slow down, which I think reflects both Dwight trying to be more introspective. I think it's also reflective of how Dwight is very much into anything sort of new agey, spiritual. Like you could sell Dwight easily like $3 million worth of crystals. Like
I
if
suspect
you
somebody has.
it's probably true. Or like
Help explain some of the different
elixirs,
things
sages, stuff like that.
Tonics,
Yeah, Dwight. I think Dwight would make those purchases.
monorails. we can quit on this. One of the things that I do, having done this now we've been doing this for almost 20 years, really. It is we get to know players and people over a long stretch of time, because if somebody's in the league for a long time, it's 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, LeBron James, 20 years, where you're around them, and that is a long time. But you get these guys at a very specific time in their lives, and they come from a very but this isn't the totality of their entire Dwight Howard, God willing, is going to live another 50 years before and all these other things. And so it is always interesting to watch people try to figure out who they are in real time in the public, and whether it's Dwight or more broadly other people in the professional athlete career, particularly when you're talking about guys who are younger in their 20s, mid 20s, I don't always think we give them enough space to understand that aspect of it, that they are doing all this stuff under all these while trying, the rest of us will be figuring out exactly what kind of person we are. And Dwight, because of that background we talked about, working through it.
Yeah. And that's
Still
why he
in real
wants to.
time. And that's what he's doing when he talks about crystals and snakes and
Well, the crystals thing I made up, but
right.
he
But
does want to have giraffes in his yard, which I
who
don't blame
doesn't?
him, by the way. I love giraffes.
You
Giraffes
ever
are,
stayed at Disney's Magic Kingdom in Orlando? It is the best thing about that is you wake up, you walk outside on your balcony, there's a freaking giraffe right there. Giraffes are awesome.
yeah, not counting, like domestic dogs, cats, like stuff that you could realistically have if you don't have the means of, say, I don't know, Dwight Howard. Giraffes may be my favorite animals on this planet. I just think they are
I
endlessly fascinating. I
I
don't blame him for
love
wanting to cultivate them.
absolutely. I love animals where you can absolutely 100% in like the most stark and easy to understand terms get the evolutionary part of it.
Yeah,
Like, oh, okay, long neck, tall trees eat the leaves up there. Like that's how we giraffe began to thrive over horses or zebras over there.
yeah.
Like I just like it's very good. Like the tongue that rat, like all of this stuff, that to me is just completely fascinating. So kudos to giraffes and for Dwight to opening up for GQ. Anyway, I hope everybody had a great holiday. And this will be some interesting stuff to talk about on Monday with the Lakers again, Friday against Sacramento, and then the big rematch against Detroit is Sunday, isn't it? I
Yeah,
believe, Andy.
I don't think somehow they're going to play this game without LeBron or Isaiah Stewart in the same room at the same time.
We'll see how that goes. Everybody have a great weekend. See you on Monday.